Hello and welcome back to another review video. Today I'm doing the 25.11 support tier list, so if you enjoy content, like, subscribe and listen to it. There were a couple of changes this patch to the support role. Most notably, we saw a nerf towards Elise, a nerf towards Annie, and then a quality of life slash buff towards Ashe. Doesn't really hugely affect her in support, but it is some level of power. I've also added Twitch and Setback as support options, as Set has seen a gradual increase in pick rate in the support role, and Twitch obviously got buffed more recently with the 5% AP ratio per stack on the E going up. It's still not good. I would still recommend avoiding it, but it is definitely some power towards a role which he was once upon a time played in. Let's get into it. So Vegeta is going to lead off with Twitch. Champion is still performing really badly in the support role without items such as Crown of the Shattered Queen, and the overall, I believe, kit is still weaker than what it was before. Back before when he was able to be played as an AP support option, it still just doesn't perform that well. Nasha and Rabadon are cheaper items, and you can still spike off 2 items when opting into them. He just forgoes a lot of the standard utility and kind of items and just generalistic power that a lot of the other supports have, and for that I just struggle to recommend him. Unless he is just egregiously strong, this pick will just not really be performing in the support role again. That being said though, his other roles are doing a bit better with AP variations. I think you can opt into it every so often as a mid laner, and you can opt, well, I mean, if you're only really playing him mid if you're playing AP, and you can sometimes opt into it when you're playing bot lane Twitch. It's still not his best way of going. This champ still underperforms when opting into the AP itemization, but there are better spots for it, just not in the support role at the moment. MF remains as a D2 option. She strictly just needs AP ratio buffs to really find her footing again. She is also another champion which just won't really be a viable support option again until she receives some level of buffs. Malphite isn't unplayable, but he's not great by any means. He's more of a gimmick pick, but he does have some tools within his kit which help him. He has some level of durability if you opt into it, and those can be merits as a support option. I'd say he's slightly better than the other two, but he's still not a pick you're going to traditionally want to be playing. Veigar just requires too much. Veigar in the past used to be actually a viable support option. These days he's been pushed really aggressively into level scaling to try and get him out of the bot lane. He's also not an amazing spot at the moment, and like your main tool for playing support Veigar is Cage, and with items like Shirelli as being a bit weaker than they have been in the past, it's just a pick I wouldn't really recommend playing. Ashe remains as a D2 option. She's not as bad as the other options here. The kit is just not as good as it has been in the past as well. Another pick, kind of like, MFs and even your Twitches of past, where their kits were stronger, kind of enabling them to kind of function as a support. Ashe has definitely been adjusted since then. She's also suffered through like rune nerfs and just other itemization nerfs, like Old Imperial Mandate was a lot better on her. Halo Blades was a lot better on her. And overall, she's just not really that great of an option at the moment. If you can accelerate a lead, then I'd say she's more viable than the other picks. Her early game is still stronger than the other options here, and her ult is still a very valuable pick tool. Just not a pick I would really recommend at the moment. With Set, I'm going to leave within the D tier. There are some optimizations which can be done here, and I can imagine him possibly being bumped up to the C tier in time, but right now, there's just issues with his keystone. So there are 5 keystone options I believe Set players have been opting into. We have Phase Rush, which is underperforming. It's been pushed quite aggressively towards scaling. Not a rune choice I'd really recommend opting into at the moment. Glacial looks pretty bad. Also not a rune choice I'd recommend opting into at the moment. PTA, I think is sometimes like an option you can lean into. Still doesn't look amazing though. Conqueror looks to be his main rune to opt into, but then outperforming all of those is Grasp. Not only is the tree better for him, like opting into things like Overgrowth, Second Wind, either Shield Bash or Demolish can be really nice on him. And then like for itemization options, we've seen like Stridebreaker rushes, we've seen like Heartsteel rushes. Overall, it just doesn't look amazing at the moment. Like even like DMP and Trailblazer rushes like all look kind of awkward in their current spots. I think he has issues, clearly. Like his itemization just isn't that great at the moment. But there are kind of ways of getting around it. And like if you opt into him in the right spots, against the right comps, with the right build, I think he could probably be bumped up to the C tier, maybe even B tier in those like really, really Exodia spots. Not an option I still recommend though. And I have seen some like other things like even Spellbook as like an option on him. Still doesn't look that great. The C tier then leads off with Gragas. I think he's got good counterpick spots. Still not amazing though. I think he, just kind of thrives in most counter-pick spots. Outside of that, you're not really going to be playing him. It's kind of the same issue of like Renata, where I think they have competitively viable spots. Like if anything, more competitively viable spots. They just don't tend to function as well in solo queue because they are either reliant on like in Renata's case, like Callista and like certain ADCs, which can like really amp them up, or they're reliant on being counter picks and being very good against like either as like flex options or like specific kind of matchup dynamics like Alistar, Gragas, for example. Just not picks I would really recommend for solo queue at the moment. Amumu, he's just easy to play. He doesn't have great itemization though, and that's like the big prohibiting factor for him. He's been a good support in the past. Even Shroud existed, Radiant Virtue existed, and right now he's just not that, so he does remain as the C2 option. But if you're looking for a flex pick, he's easy to play, and that is kind of the merit of the champion here. Mel, I've seen Mel support work, even in solo queue. Like, if you get a lot of gold on this champion, there are spots where she can be pretty valuable. That being said, though, the spots aren't that common, and she needs a lot of gold to really function. I'd recommend some of the other AP supports over her, like your LeBlancs and your Zoes, but I think in the right spot, and if you're good at piloting the champion, she probably sits as more like a higher C tier option. I think Silas also another one where a mage which can be accelerated with gold quite aggressively, needs good spots though, like you can only really play him in those spots. Other than that, he just ends up being a pretty worthless support option if you just can't really accelerate him or get an egregious lead early on into the game. For that, I also don't really recommend him as an option. Moving on to the beta, then we lead off with Yuumi, who has just suffered a substantial amount of nerfs over the last couple of patches. Debuff towards the buff towards Zeri in 25.12 will help her. Zeri Yuumi is a very common pairing. It is one of Zeri's best pairings. It's pretty common knowledge at this point, but it's nice when you are just stronger through one of your core champions being buffed. I think Yuumi will definitely benefit from that. She, in the right spots, still a decent champion. I think she's just been nerfed a decent amount over time, and that has definitely left her power not being like quite as strong as she has been in the past. Other picks within the beta, I like the likes of Tahm Kench. I don't like Tahm Kench at the moment. I think there are builds, like simple builds, I'd almost describe them as, which you can lean into at the moment, like your Grasp Heartsteel, where you're playing very selfishly. But at that point, what's the real purpose of playing Tahm Kench support other than just hoping you get really accelerated, like you can just pilot the champion well enough to really like stomp lane, almost. Outside of that, he's got a level of safety net for an ADC. But then when you're opting into this build, you're just not playing around that quite as much, and there's some level of just like a misunderstanding or not, like just the kit doesn't really align with itself, and I think Tahm Kench for that just kind of misses the mark as a champion at the moment. On top of that, he's obviously just been nerfed a lot of times more recently, and he really suffered as a champion from that, which is why he's like a low B tier. I just don't really recommend him in his current state. Brand sits within the beta, just another champion which has kind of been over nerfed in time. He still has some level, more agency than most supports, and he's very mid to low elo skewed, but the pick is just in a weak spot at the moment, which is why he lingers as like a B tier option. Teemo in the right spot can be a decent support option. He scales really well. His Q's an effective form of crowd control, and for that I think there is value in this champion. Be careful, people will think you're trolling when you're picking this pick, but there are genuine spots where he can be a good option to lean into. Wei doesn't really see play that much as a support anymore. It's he had like his moments. I think even Carrier played him, for example, like back along. But in more recent times, Hui has been nerfed, and I believe it was some level of flat and just early game power, which has affected him as a support option. I think there are still spots where you can play him, and if you give him gold, he can be valuable. There are just other picks I'd recommend over him. He lingers as like a low B tier option at the moment. It's mostly the fact that he has a lot of like different tools within his kit, which kind of like props him up as like a good B tier option. Oh, I said good tier, as like a B tier option at the moment. Nilly support I think is underrated, and with the buffs to her next patch, the E going from 40% to 55% AP ratio, I think Nilly support will remain as a B tier option. I think Nilly support, the higher up you go, the better it is, and even just as a mid to low elo pick, she is an E steroid, and that can be valuable to an for certain compositions. But alongside like the Echoes of Helia, Moonstone build, I think this pick is kind of underrated to an extent, the support role, albeit I don't think it's good enough to be like a mainstream option, so it will never probably really pick up as like a pick for the most part. Annie lingers as a beta option, a low beta option now, probably maybe even drops onto the C tier if the nerfs were sizable and it was decent amount of power loss. Annie support wasn't amazing and in the previous patch, and it lingers as still like a pretty mediocre pick as like a low beta option at the moment. Blitzcrank, I think if you pilot this champion well, find the right spots for him in draft, I think he can be a good option. I don't think he's like the blindable support or just like really strong option of Blitz in the past. He has been intentionally nerfed, so he's not like lingering as high of a ban rate, but right now, yeah, I'd say he's fine in the right spots. I wouldn't recommend playing him, but if you find the spots for him, he can be a good option to lean into. I think Seraphine with certain pairings does really like pick up her spot within the tier list. Right now, though, she's like a underwhelming jack of all trades champion. She does a bit of everything, nothing really that amazing, but if you can like utilize some of those tools, like Ashe for example, then I think Seraphine's placement does increase and she does get better from those kind of pairings. Senna sits within the B tier. She is being nerfed for ADC 25.12, so that wouldn't affect her support placement, but I believe she is just for the most part weaker as a support option now. The AP ratio nerfed kind of removed her flexibility for the most part. I think they went too hard on the AP ratio nerf. I don't believe they should have like basically completely killed the Moonstone Echoes of Helio build. I think it was nice that it was existent every so often, and to an extent you can still opt into Ardent maybe as a support when you are going like your Cleaver RFC build if you are going down that line. But generalistically, yeah, center support still lingers as a B tier option. I think in the right spots, she can definitely be like upper placement alongside a lot of the B tier champions, where they are traditionally a lot more like dependent on being picked in the right spot and aren't like your blindable champions. That being said, Pyke is just a hard champion to play, which is why I don't really recommend him as much. If you can master Pyke, he's one of the best supports you can opt into. Being a very aggressive early game snowballing champion really helps, like if you're smurfing or if you're just climbing to one of those like higher elo marks, as it does give you a lot of agency. Your picks like your Zax and your Gallios are great champions for displacement and for some level of self pill or just engage. They don't have great itemization. That's always going to be the prohibiting factor of recommending these two champions. I think they're good itemization. They'd be great support picks, kind of akin to Mumu. But right now, they just don't really have a great spot, and they are kind of reliant on going the same kind of tank items which like the other like wardens are almost going, like your lockets and stuff, and they don't really want locket as much. They want to be in the fight and kind of using some level of like amplifier, like an even shroud for example. I'm so mad they removed that item. Actually, I feel like every video I end up having to kind of like reference it because it was just the reason why these supports were so good in the past, but they just don't have their good spots anymore. Ricard, well, I mean, they have some good spots, just not as consistently anymore. Ricard sits within the beta. He's fine. I think he sits towards the high end of the beta. He's like a good old reliable champion. He's just not as present in the solo queue meta at the moment. I think he's become a bit reliant on like Xayah pairing, or even just like superseded by some of the other support options like Alistar and Rel for example, and even Nautilus are really solid picks at the moment. And Rakan just doesn't really have as much priority as those other options at the moment. Lux and Xerath sit as B2 options. I believe they will jump back up to the A tier instantly with the Horizon focus buffs. They haven't. They've remained as B tier picks, and they the Horizon focus just generalistically lost a decent amount of power for these kind of support classes because they took away the 10% damage amp, which was used by all of these artillery mages for the most part, but primarily the supports, which didn't really care about the AP increase on the new Horizon focus because they don't need to like farm. They mostly just cared about the damage amp. Overall, yeah, they're slightly weaker. He's still a high B tier pick. I don't think he's bad, but yeah, he's just not quite as effective as he was. I think Lux sits towards the high end of the B tier and might get bumped up to the A tier if I'm feeling like she deserves a spot next patch. They're still good picks. Swain sits within the B tier. He's doing better as a support option at the moment. I don't like Swain support. I'll never recommend it as a pick, but if you enjoy Swain, I think in the right spots, he can be a solid support option. That being said, you just have to find those low damage, like high durability compositions where, yeah, this champion will get more value and won't just get like busted out really quickly because he doesn't have the same level of tools as some of the other supports. Albeit his E is a good snare tool and his W can give good vision and just be nice for kind of like for having a bit more pressure on the map. Fiddlesticks seems to have just found a spot within the B tier. The nerfs were sizable to him not in the previous patch, but the patch before that. He's settled as, yeah, like a solid B2 option. He's still got a really powerful ultimate, and his damage can still be really nice, but the damage is lower, and the CC is lower, and those were two of the main, like, kind of things for this champion when playing him as support, and he has just lost some power in that regard. Morgana sits within the B tier. The buff she received not too long ago helped her. She's fine for average play. Like, I think she's actually almost good for average play now. she doesn't perform that well in Elite still. She just becomes a bit too sport dependent, and her kit just isn't reliable enough, or isn't. Her kit just doesn't line up quite well enough. Like, it wants to do a lot of different things at once, and that is Morgana's biggest issue at the moment. Pantheon needs off the A tier, a good AD aggressive option. He's easier to play than Pyke, and that's why I recommend him as an option over Pyke. Don't think he scales quite as well into Elite outside of being like a flex pick option. Then I'd swap the two around. But for like mid to low elo, I think Pantheon, if you're looking for an AD support, is probably the one I would recommend the most. Karma sits within the A tier. Her enchant build is still doing relatively decently at the moment. She still can apply pressure early on into the lane, and if you are looking for a slightly more aggressive enchanter, then I think Karma can be a good option to lean into. If you're looking for something with a bit more agency, Zoe and LeBlanc are great options to go to at the moment. If you give them gold, they will print damage. They're not as reliant on level scaling as some of the other champions. And LeBlanc even is being buffed in the next patch, and I do think LeBlanc is already in a very good spot for the support role. So another champion which I would really recommend keeping your eyes on. If anything, I would recommend learning LeBlanc support, because it's nice just having some level of variance within your champion pool, and something which can maybe give you a bit more agency to pick in like certain spots where you know it will like reward you for playing it. If you're looking for something a bit more niche, then Shaco support can definitely do the trick. His boxes can be very powerful if played kind of like correctly around, or just put in the right spots. You are giving up some early game agency when you lock in this champion. He's not going to have the same level of like consistent CC or durability that some of the other supports provide. But like in the right compositions where champions just can't really like destroy your boxes without detonating them first, I think Shaco works really nicely as an option, and definitely one of the solid A tier picks at the moment. Zillion sits within the A tier. He's niche. He's kind of the good old reliable of the A tier. He the movement speed buffs are all very nice, especially with like certain champions within your compositions. Like you see your Zeris, you see your Hekrams. Zillion can be really nice in those spots. He has good base damage, and you can opt into some durability within his kit. Chevalier for like for some more utility. I think he's a pretty solid A tier option at the moment. Bard sits within the A tier. He's receiving 5 movement speed next patch, which is big for Bard. Bard really wants to just be around the map and kind of like applying pressure where he can, and that kind of a buff is perfect for him. So Bard, definitely a champion I'd recommend learning at the moment. He is pretty unique and definitely one of the harder to play supports, so I wouldn't recommend taking him instantly into ranked. But if you're comfortable on him, I'd recommend relearning him and then picking him up going into next patch. Definitely one of the mid to high end A tier options at the moment. Vel'Koz sits within the A tier. I'd say he's just a tier above the Luxes and the Zerefs at the moment. He received buffs not too long ago, and they helped him, and ever since then, he's kind of been riding high as a solid A tier DPS, or not even DPS, just damage option as a support. He kind of sits around the same area as Zyra, who is another champion I recommend for like the mid to low elo range, as she can just output an excess amount of DPS, which can be really valuable if you're looking for a champion with a bit more agency within the game. Maokai, I think, is a fine support option, is a pretty good abuser of the likes of Trailblazer and Solstice Slay. He has been very strong in the past as a support option. Right now, I'd say he's fine. He has great vision control tools, he has great lockdown and CC, he's relatively durable, and that kind of promotes him as a pretty solid A tier support option in his current state. Nautilus, good old reliable hook champion. This pick is pretty meta agnostic. You can play him in most spots and you'll probably get some level of value out of the champion. Things like Braum obviously do a bit better in solo queue at the moment when things like Nautilus are just so heavily blinded. But this champion, if you're just very comfortable on him and you know you just want to like be able to lock down and CC a target, then he's a good option to go to. Some of your other meta staples are like your Alistars and your Leonas. I think these picks can all do really good things in the right spots. Alistar definitely really thriving as a champion at the moment. I mean, he'd already been picked up quite heavily in competitive and is one of the like main staples there. But even in solo queue, he's performing quite well at the moment, which just suggests like I just recommend playing him in his current state. Very durable, great CC, and the heal on his passive is very nice for certain team compositions, and even just like out for like a duo lane. Leona got buffed more recently. The mana cost change were nice for her, combined with the passive being lingering for longer, just enables her to be a bit better in some spots. I think she's a great lockdown champion. She's relatively easy to play. Pairs really nice with the likes of MF, and another good old reliable champion. Some of your enchanters are like your Sorakas and your Milios. I think Milio, if you pair him with the right champions, can be really good. I believe he supports one of the highest win rates in solo queue at the moment for a support option. obviously he tends to be traditionally quite easy to play, and that's a pretty big selling point for the champion, and I think rightfully so. He should linger as an A tier option. Pick him with the right champions which can benefit from his W, and I think he's a great option to go to. Soraka, great traditional enchanter support. If you're looking for someone who can like extend fights and you can consistently rotate a good amount of heroes, then I think Soraka can be a great option. Also another pick very deserving of an A tier spot. If you're looking for some level of disengage or self peel, then like your or like some peel, then Tarek, Shen, Poppy, all great options. Very counterpick reliant, but I think they are some of the best champions you can go to in counterpick spots. Shen being nerfed next patch will probably drop him down towards the lower end of the A tier, but right now, all three of these picks, pick them in the right spots, and they will definitely have enough value to kind of reward these kind of champions. Fresh also lingers within the A tier. He performs better in solo queue at the moment. Like he has just had a lot of generic buffs where it's just like flat E damage or slightly better scaling or armor growth. It can depend on like just what I ended up doing with the champion. But overall, he sits as a solid A2 option at the moment. I don't think he's the best of the barrel. I think there are like a lot of the S options are just better to go to than him at the moment. But he sits as a very solid A2 option, especially with those immobile marksmen into like your blind Jarvans, for example. Nico still sits as an A2 option. This pick is being nerfed quite aggressively in 25.12. Most people have caught on to the fact that she's an incredibly powerful elite and competitive pick. Her early lane power is just some of the best in the game, if not just outright the best in the game. So Riot are rightfully so swinging quite heavily at it. I do think she will still remain as a solid option, but she's very hard to play, and that is one of the reasons I don't have her in the S tier at the moment. I think you do just have to sink a lot of time into this champion to really learn it and get an effective amount of power out of it. Otherwise, you won't use the early game quite as quickly as maybe you need to, and eventually won't value as highly compared to some of the other supports later on into the game. Albeit she has her W's incredibly powerful scout ability, and her E and R are great CC and snare tools. Moving on to the S tier, we lead off with Lulu. Lulu sits here purely through, I mean, like she got nerfed 3 times in a row and she still lingers as a really good support option. I think she just requires slightly better spots now, not just quite as generalistic as she used to be. Pair with like your Jinxes and your Cogmores and stuff like that, where they can really utilize the W steroid, and I think this pick is still really good. Still remains as an S2 option. Elise is my recommended agency pick if you're looking for a champion which outputs a huge amount of damage and works really nicely as a support at the moment. Elise is great. Even with the nerf she received last patch, they were mostly focused on her jungle clear, like the 5% AP on her like spider form autos. Support at least doesn't really care about that as much. She cares about the snare on the E, the base damage of the kit, and if you can snowball your advantages, I think Elise is still an incredible option to go to at the moment. Rel and Braum are like your, well, I mean, in Braum's case, he's a great defense option. But I like use him as a counter pick, and he is one of the best options in the game. I would just always recommend having Braum as a champion within your pool. On the flip side, I'd also always recommend having Rel within your pool. She is probably my number one recommendation for like an engaged support option. Pairs really nicely with so many of the marksmen within the game at the moment, and if you find the right spots, like you find the right engages, I think she can like completely flip games on its head, and that is an incredibly powerful thing to have as a support. If you're looking for some of your more traditional options, I say traditional, like some of your more enchanter options, I think Sona, Nami, Janna all still linger as S tier options. Sona got buffed more recently, and it enabled her some more flexibility. She still has one of the strongest mid games of like any support option at the moment. Still scales really well, just not quite as well as maybe some people perceive. Her mid game is where she really spikes on like those crescendo stacks. In the case of Janna, she's a bit more dependent on being used as a counter pick and like being an amplifier for certain like heavy AD marksmen, but she is incredibly strong in those spots, and that really does make her an incredibly recommendable champion. And then Nami is probably the flat out most generic work with anything champion at the moment. As long as you have some level of engage or setup within your team, I think Nami is the perfect support at the moment. Her amplifiers, her movement speed, her just in CC tools are all really nice to have on a kit at the moment, and she generally just has good numbers, and that makes her one of my top S tier spots at the moment. Rel and Braum are always going to be my two like biggest recommendations. I think you can play them almost every draft. Nami, kind of same goes with like Rao. I think she is also another champion which can be picked in most drafts, but a bit slightly more conditional. And then yeah, Jana, Sona, Elise for agency, Lulu's still really good with certain supports, and then even like a lot of the A tier options, I think if you pilot them well, can supersede a lot of the S tier picks. Like your Alis, your Leonas, your Nautiluses can all be really good champions. And if you're looking for that disengage, then yeah, your Shens, your Tareks, your Poppies can all be really good. Those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.